They didn't just move a few feet of gravel. They went after the part of my property that made the whole place work. And what stayed with me most wasn't even the construction itself. It was the confidence behind it. The assumption that if they acted certain enough, paved fast enough, fenced clean enough, I'd eventually get tired of arguing and accept the new reality like it had always been there. If you've ever had someone smile at you while slowly taking something they know isn't theirs, then you know the feeling. First comes disbelief, then that quiet insult that settles somewhere in your chest and just stays there. I bought my place 9 years ago, back when mortgage rates still made sense, and the neighborhood felt simple. Not perfect, just simple. It's a corner lot in a working-class pocket outside Columbus. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, an old detached garage that leans a little in bad weather, and a wide gravel drive that runs along the side of the house before opening up behind the fence line. That driveway was the whole reason I bought the place. I run a small landscaping business, nothing flashy. A pickup truck, a trailer, a couple of guys during the busy months, mowers, stone, mulch, timbers, all the usual things that take up more room than people think. That wraparound gravel stretch let me move equipment in and out without blocking the road, without cluttering the curb, without becoming the guy everyone complained about. I kept it neat, always did. No junk sitting out, no oil stains, no half-dead machines. It worked, and for years nobody had a problem with it. Then the couple next door moved in. Mid-40s, polished, expensive taste, the kind of people who look like they already have a contractor saved in their favorites before they even close on a house. They bought the place beside mine and turned it into a full project almost immediately. New siding, white stone, black-framed windows, perfect shrubs lined up like soldiers. Everything about it looked curated. The husband introduced himself one evening while I was checking the mailbox. Crisp polo, loafers, handshake like we were finalizing terms. He told me they were excited to improve the look of the street. Improve, that was the word he used. I welcomed him to the neighborhood and thought that would be the end of it. But then he glanced at my truck, then my trailer, then back at me and asked if I ran a business out of the house. I told him I owned a landscaping company. He smiled politely, but it had that thin quality some smiles have when they're really just judgments in better clothing. He said he was sure we'd all work together to keep things looking clean. I should have paid more attention to the tone right then. After that, little comments started surfacing. Not direct accusations at first, just those floating remarks people make when they want to test the ground. Questions about whether equipment was stored outside overnight. Observations about truck size on a residential street. Vague references to neighborhood standards that didn't actually exist. There was no HOA there, which was one of the reasons I had bought in the area, but he clearly wished there was. The real problem showed itself during one of their dinner parties. Their driveway was packed, the curb was packed, and when I got home from work one evening, one of their guests had angled a car halfway across the mouth of my drive. I knocked on the door and asked him to move it. Instead of apologizing, he looked annoyed that I had brought it up at all. Then he said something that stuck with me. He claimed my driveway came pretty far over toward their side. I told him it extended exactly where the property line allowed it to. He tilted his head and asked whether I was sure. That was the first real warning. A week later, I came home and found 3 orange traffic cones set right on the gravel along the side stretch of my driveway. Not on their grass, not near the line, on my gravel. I sat in the truck for a few seconds just looking at them, then got out and moved them onto their lawn, gently. 10 minutes later, he was at my door talking about shared access, saying that section made sense for overflow parking when they hosted people. He told me they'd had someone take a look, and it appeared that stretch might actually fall within their boundary. I told him to show me the survey. He said it was being finalized. That told me everything. If it was being finalized, then he didn't have one. His smile disappeared, and the whole conversation lost its last little bit of civility right there on my front step. The next escalation came while I was away. I left for work early one morning and came back in the afternoon to find part of my gravel gone. In its place was a fresh strip of black asphalt, smooth and clean, blended directly into their driveway like it had always belonged there. and cutting across what had always been open access along my side yard was a brand new decorative metal fence, matte black, clean lines, stylish, also about 10 feet inside what I knew was my property. For a full minute, I just sat in my truck with the engine running, staring at it, waiting for my brain to come up with some explanation that made sense. It never did. They hadn't asked, they hadn't shown paperwork, they had just built over it and assumed I'd deal with it later. I went straight to their front door. The wife answered with a glass in her hand and that calm, controlled expression people wear when they already think they've won. I told her husband had paved over my driveway and fenced off my property. She said they had it surveyed and that section was theirs. I asked to see the survey. She said it was filed. I told her great, then email and it shouldn't be difficult. She told me maybe I should check my own documents. So that night, I did exactly that. I pulled every closing paper I had. Deed, plat, county survey, stamped markers, all of it. Then I took a metal detector and found the original iron pins buried near the line, exactly where they were supposed to be, exactly where I remembered, which meant what I had suspected from the beginning was true. They never had a real survey. They just gambled that I wouldn't push back. I called him the next morning and gave him 48 hours to remove the asphalt and the fence. He laughed, not nervous laughter, dismissive laughter. Then he told me if I had a problem, I could call a lawyer. There's something about hearing that on your own property that changes the temperature inside you. So I called one. I found a property attorney downtown, a woman who looked through my documents for about 5 minutes before saying I was right, and they had built on land they did not own. But she also made one thing very clear. Cases like that don't move fast. You file, you wait, paperwork moves, hearings get scheduled, months pass. Meanwhile, every single day, I still had to look at a fence and a fresh strip of asphalt cutting into the part of my property I used to use without a second thought. That's when the idea took shape, because even though they had paved it and fenced it, the land was still mine, legally mine, which meant I didn't have to sit quietly and admire their trespass while the courts took their time. I had work scheduled that week, including a commercial mulch delivery, 15 cubic yards. When the truck arrived early Tuesday morning, I walked the driver over and told him to back up to the new asphalt and dump it right there. He looked at me once to make sure I meant it. I told him I did. So the bed lifted and a huge dark pile of mulch spilled down right across that shiny black extension they had created for themselves, perfectly centered, completely blocking the access point they had stolen. A little after 7, their front door flew open and he came out furious, robe on, hair a mess, demanding to know what I thought I was doing. I told him the truth. I was storing mulch on my property. He said I had dumped it on their driveway. I pointed to the survey stakes I had remarked with orange flags and told him no, I had dumped it on my land. He told me I was blocking their vehicles. I told him then they'd have to use the driveway they had before they decided to redesign mine. He ordered me to move it. I told him I'd move it when my schedule allowed. He called me petty. I told him I wasn't being petty, I was being accurate. He called the police that morning. 2 officers showed up, walked the line, checked my stamped documents, and more or less said what anyone with eyes could see. It was my property. If his vehicles depended on access across my land, that sounded like his problem, not mine. The mulch sat there for 3 days. It rained once, which made it heavier and uglier. His wife taped a typed note to my fence talking about neighborhood standards and responsible conduct. I kept it. It still makes me laugh. When I finally removed the mulch for the job, he looked relieved for about 4 days. Then the next delivery came in. 10 tons of gravel, dropped right onto the same strip. Bigger pile, worse timing. They had guests coming that evening. By then he had stopped pretending I was the unreasonable one and moved fully into open outrage. He accused me of harassment. I told him it was storage. He said I was doing it on purpose. I told him so had he. That one actually got through to him for a second. He called the police again and got the same answer. Civil dispute. My land. Not much they could do. Over the next week, I used that strip constantly. Pallets of pavers, stacked timbers. At one point, my trailer sat diagonally across it because that's where I happened to want it. Every single use carried the same message. The paper still mattered, even if he wanted style and confidence to outrank recorded boundaries. But I won't pretend it was fun the whole time. Standoffs like that get into your routine. Trash day feels tense. A simple trip outside feels loaded. Every time I heard a truck next door, part of me wondered whether they were about to try something else. Then one evening while I was grilling, I overheard him talking in his yard about filing zoning complaints against my business. That told me what this had really become for him. Not a misunderstanding over a boundary, a campaign of control. He wanted the street to look a certain way, feel a certain way, function a certain way. And I was the inconvenient reminder that he hadn't bought authority over the whole block. A week later, I got a certified letter. He was suing me, claimed I was interfering with his property enjoyment, creating nuisance conditions and damaging his improved driveway access. Improved driveway access. That phrase almost made me laugh out loud. I took the letter straight to my attorney. She skimmed it and said, "Good." Then she told me they would counterclaim for encroachment, trespass, and full restoration. She said something that stuck with me after that. Judges don't like self-help property grabs. That was exactly what he had done. He didn't want a dispute handled properly. He wanted a quiet takeover wrapped in asphalt and modern metal. Around that time, I added one last move. I rented a bright blue portable toilet for a commercial job. I didn't need it at my house, but temporary job site storage on my own property was allowed. So I had it placed right on the contested strip near the line, facing their patio. When it arrived, his wife came outside already filming with her phone, calling it unbelievable. I told her it was OSHA compliant and safety mattered. For 2 weeks, that thing stood there like a monument to bad decisions. Neighbors noticed, delivery drivers noticed. A few of the older residents, the ones who had been around long enough to recognize exactly what had happened, quietly let me know they were on my side. One man across the street even shuffled over one evening just to say he'd seen what they had done and I shouldn't let them get away with it. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until he said it. By the time the court date finally arrived, the whole situation had hardened. The asphalt had started cracking from the weight I had put on it. The black fence leaned a little where the survey flags made its trespass impossible to ignore. He had stopped smiling completely. When we walked into that courtroom, he still looked like a man who believed presentation could carry him through anything. Nice suit, perfect posture, confident expression. But court as a way of stripping things down to what they actually are. It wasn't dramatic. Small room, tired wood paneling, fluorescent light, quiet clerk, judge who looked like he'd heard every version of neighbor warfare before. His attorney argued that they had relied on a reasonable boundary assessment before making improvements. Reasonable. There was that word again. Then my attorney handed over the deed, the certified survey, photographs of the original iron pins, timestamps showing the paving crew had worked while I was away, and one very simple question changed the whole tone of the room. She asked to see the survey they had relied on. What they produced wasn't a survey in any real sense. It was a rough sketch, contractor notes, handwritten measurements, something put together with a tape measure and what looked like a printout from an online map. No licensed surveyor, no county certification, no stamp. The judge looked at it for a long moment, then asked whether it was official. Their side had no good answer. That was the turning point. You could feel it. The ruling itself was direct. Full restoration of my property to its prior condition, removal of the asphalt encroachment, removal of the fence section that crossed the line, payment of my legal fees and court costs. Then the judge added something that stayed with me. Property lines exist for a reason, and taking matters into your own hands is not how civilized disputes get resolved. Civilized. Funny word, considering how uncivil the whole thing had felt in real time. But the point was clear. He had tried to skip the part where he asked, verified, and respected the answer. They were given 30 days. The fence came down first. I watched from my garage while contractors unbolted the panels and lifted the posts out of the ground. The asphalt took longer. They had to cut and jackhammer the section that crossed onto my land. For 2 straight days, the sound echoed through the neighborhood. Dust hung in the air. That smooth, confident strip they had poured like a declaration slowly broke apart under machine teeth and hammers. I won't call what I felt joy. It wasn't that simple. It was more like balance returning. When they were done, my gravel was back. It needed leveling, fresh stone, a little work, but it was mine again, fully and visibly mine. After that, things got quiet. Their guests stopped parking creatively. The matching SUVs stayed within their original boundaries. The blue portable toilet disappeared because I no longer had any use for it. We became civil in the most limited sense of the word. A nod at the mailbox sometimes, nothing more. One evening, a few weeks after the restoration was finished, I was standing in the driveway at sunset with my truck where it was always supposed to sit when he walked out to check the mail. For a second, we just stood there across the line that had caused all that damage. Then he said, I could have just talked to them. I let that sit for a second before I answered. I told him I had, before the asphalt. He didn't reply. That's the part people like him never seem to understand. They move fast, act certain, build first, and later tell themselves the other person escalated things by refusing to adapt. But confidence is not ownership. Style is not permission. And paper matters a lot when the ground under your feet does. I still think sometimes about how easy it would have been to let it go. 10 feet doesn't sound like much until it becomes the beginning of something bigger. Because if I had let him keep that strip, what would have come next? Complaints about my trailer, pressure on my business, more attempts to make the neighborhood fit his preferences. Sometimes these conflicts are not really about land. They're about who gets to remain where they already are. So, yes, I escalated it, absolutely. The mulch was deliberate, the gravel was deliberate. The portable toilet was definitely deliberate. I know that. But I also know something else. Without resistance, he would have read my silence as permission. He counted on me deciding it wasn't worth the trouble. He was wrong about that. So I'll leave the rest to you. If someone built over your property and told you to call a lawyer, would you wait quietly for the process to play out? Or would you make sure they felt every inch they tried to take?